Hello and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Factory. In the factory today, I'm thrilled to have Leanna Renee Hieber. She is a speculative fiction writer, actress, and ghost tour guide. Is that right? You give tours of haunted places, and
Yes.
I want to hear more. I want you to spook me out.
Okay, but I like friendly ghosts, so it's not gonna be. I'm not here to bring out necessarily all of the terror. My favorite stories are actually the friendly ghosts, but we have there's a quite a range. I mean, it's New York, so there's quite a range of personalities. We'll tell you that.
Actually, a New York ghost who's kind of mean is just kind of like an average ghost, I think. I live in California now, and they say that the difference between California and New York is in New York, if somebody says fuck you, they're really saying hello. And in California, if they say hello, then what they mean is fuck you. So I think friendly ghosts in New York are probably still pretty brash.
Well, they say what they mean. See, that's the thing about New York. New Yorkers say what they mean, and sometimes it's just with a bit of an edge. But at the same time, like I come from Ohio originally, in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of times when you're in those sort of Midwestern sort of nice cultures, it's like it's hard to know what anybody means or or where anyone's coming from. At least in New York, if you need help, New Yorkers are right there to help you. If as long as you are moving quickly down the sidewalk, that's really all anyone asks of you, honestly.
People
Yeah.
visiting New York, the worst thing that you can do is be in the way.
That's all anybody wants. Everyone's trying to get to the next place, and it always takes a while. So, just keep it moving. But again, as a tour guide, I have to be cautious about, not being dismissive of tourism, because that is also part of the job. So I work for a great company called Burrows of the Dead, and it is an incredible company run by my co-author in my nonfiction, Andrea Janes. And so she founded the company over 10 years ago, and it's been a really wonderful company that focuses on respect for the dead while still sharing about haunted spaces and the complicated nature of history and hauntings in New York City. So I really love working with a company full of wonderful tour guides who are many of them writers in their own right, and who love to tell a good story, but want to make sure we're getting the facts on the ground correct as best as possible. So that's a whole one of the missions in my career, both as a fiction writer and as a nonfiction writer, is to make sure I'm creating a realistic historical setting in which paranormal things happen. But there's got to be sort of a baseline for me of actual historicity. Otherwise, otherwise, for me, the points I'm trying to make, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, don't really land.
What is the degree of your credulity when it comes to the paranormal? Do you believe
I do
the
believe.
other world, the other dimension? They cross over, they visit?
Yeah. Yeah, and they have since I was a kid. So, the great thing about having a co-author in nonfiction is that it provides a range of different experiences as well as a range of different beliefs. I am much in the X Files dynamic. I am much more the Mulder, and Andrea is much more the Scully. I have just frankly had more just number of weird things that have just happened to have happened to me. And she's had some doozies too, but she definitely approaches things with a bit more skepticism in any given situation. However, because I know how wild and magical our imaginations are as human beings, I also know that I can just as easily as anything create a haunting if I'm not careful. So I always go in also skeptic first, believer if it pushes past all the rest of the metrics I kind of, put forth. But one, believer or not, if you know the actual history of a place, there's a certain something to be said for the weight of history in a significant area, or a place where tragedies have happened, or a place where joyful things have happened. There can be a spectral imprint that's joyous too. It doesn't just have to be about tragedy, but any intense experience will kind of leave what paranormal folks say is a kind of like a psychic imprint or a spectral weight to it. And I definitely do believe in that because my understanding of history is also informed by understanding what had happened there. And in a lot of cases, for me, those spaces become cautionary tales. We can honor the dead and their sacrifices and what happened to them and that tragedy, not by trying to be like, ooh, here people, scary things happened here, but say what happened that we could then prevent. Um, Andrea and I's first book was called A Haunted History of Invisible Women. And we opened that book with the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. Not because we want to talk about a building that's haunted. We want to talk about the fact that we are haunted by what happened there. As tour guides, we discuss everything that went wrong when 146 people, 123 of them were women as young as 14 years old, died in that fire. And thousands of New Yorkers saw it happen March 25th, 1911. And it created our modern day labor laws. And I get very emotional when I talk about it, when I'm standing in front of that building where it happened, when I'm standing on the sidewalk where people's bodies were lined up, having fallen, having jumped. It's the weight of that. If I'm ever at a point where I become at all desensitized to that, and I need to walk away from my job, because I say every time, I never ever want to become numb to what happened here, because I never want anyone to take their labor laws or any of their other safety protections in our world for granted. There's just a lot we're taking for granted right now as a society. And so one of the things I think that haunted history and history in general, discussions of it, gives us just enough distance from the present to kind of be able to look at it. But very often I'm writing about it because I want us to think about it now, because it's happening again now. There's so much of the 19th century that's being repeated right now on a massive scale. So whether it's my fiction all set in the late 19th century, when you've got robber barons taking advantage of a widening wealth gap, and you've got the beginnings of labor law, the beginnings of civil rights laws, the beginning of women's suffrage and bodily autonomy, all these kinds of things that we're still fighting these fights. But I think fiction can help us talk about that in a way that gives us just enough escapism. And that's the same thing with haunted history. It's like, ooh, we'll pull you into the ghost story, and then we'll make sure you're really paying attention to your own modern moment.
That's the foundation of Jungian psychology, that you could look at religion, ghosts, the supernatural from a rational cognitive point of view, but that's missing the point.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we tell these stories? Why do we believe in these things? And to your exact point, it's because they hit here and they have impact on our everyday lives. And ultimately, hopefully, they connect us better with each other to show some empathy and maybe even make society and life better through their telling and through their belief.
Absolutely. I say in just about every kind of book that I write, some kind of variation of how much the dead teach the living about how to live. And I really think that that's not just, sort of a death positivity movement, which has kind of been an interesting thing. The Order of the Good Death is a whole death positivity movement. Caitlin Doherty is one of the authors that has been a founder in that sort of movement, to talk about death in a way that is open and accessible and not fear-mongering, and also acknowledging grief, and that it's a process, and that all of us have a very complicated relationship to it, and a fear. We are born with a mortal fear of dying. And that's a healthy thing. That's not something to start kind of rationalize out of us. We just have to make sure we're not operating from it in places where it's not helpful, or where it goes against what the community needs in the moment. People acting out of fear leads to really horrible things. And so I feel like the way that ghost lore has been a very it's synthesized in every part of my being. I mean, the hauntings that I've experienced go back to my earliest memories. And having uncanny experiences, and later being like, oh, that was okay. So when great grandma came to visit, she actually had passed away that day. Okay. All right. Just getting a timestamp on it. All right. The woman I'm named for kind of came to visit the day she passed. I was on part of her goodbye tour, I guess, when I was about 6 years old. And I love that story, because it was sort of like, my earliest haunting was just like my great grandma checking in on her namesake, and so for me, like, that was a wonderful thing of, like, you could interpret that almost as a guardian angel story, because I was very sick actually when it happened. and she broke my fever. Because the timing on it was she passed, my fever broke. I went into some kind of weird trance state talking about God and the angels using words I'd never been taught. And I write about this in my most recent book with Andrea, America's Most Gothic. I talk about some of these moments that happened to me because it has to be relevant for me to sort of trot that one out. Because it is a very personal story, and there are people who just do not believe me when I say that this happened, and I'm like, well, that's fine. You can choose to not believe me, but I am speaking from my lived experience, and I'm not trying to gain anything from saying this. It's just, this is what happened. It was corroborated by my entire family. And I certainly had nothing to gain from that at 6 years old. So it's one of those things where I try to kind of operate in a space of openness and sort of see and then see what happens. Because from that moment on, I really kind of felt both connected to the concept of the spirit world, and I also felt very driven. And from that moment, I think it kind of opened a door. And from that moment on, I felt very compelled to write about ghosts. Sometimes in a very just fun and whimsical way, and other times a very, very serious way. It depends on if it's fiction or nonfiction. And that's been a calling my whole life. I have felt called to, as a performer, as a tour guide, and as a writer, to kind of be in conversation with the spirit world in everything I do.
I believe you. I saw my father's ghost as if it happened yesterday, and he was as corporeal as can be.
Yeah.
And at first I was like, this just can't be happening. And then I was stunned to the point where it took me out of myself in the moment.
Yeah.
And then I had to double check, and I knew I was experiencing something extraordinary in the moment. And then at the blink of another eye, gone, which further confirmed the aberration. And I've had similar psychic feelings, premonitions. Around the time of my mother's death, I experienced many of the same feelings and visions that you did.
Yeah.
So you bring up lived experience, and the way we perceive the world each and every day, the most banal, boring of days, is astonishing because it's nothing like what reality, capital R, actually is. We filter everything. We're constantly looking at the world through these doors of perception. So why not? Believe in science all you want, but that does not preclude or create a mutually exclusive kind of arrangement with this possibility in reality that there's stuff we just don't know.
Exactly. And I do not think these things are at all antithetical. I do not think for a moment that science and the paranormal are at all incompatible. I am a person of science. I am blessed by modern medicine, and as are I am alive because of modern medicine. So is my family. So are my loved ones. And so I believe in that wholeheartedly. I also have these other things I can't explain. And the minute that you start to really look into things like theoretical physics, a lot of that stuff about phasing in and out of spaces and about matter and form and all of this stuff, it starts to sound a little bit like a ghost story. And it may be. We may find that time is in fact nonlinear, and it can loop back on itself a little bit. And there's so much of our brain that we're not using. And there's also a lot of stuff, like you said, that we filter out. There's a lot of things our eyes and the spectrums that we see on, or the spectrums that we hear on, whether it's the sounds that are so low we can't perceive them, which, yes, scientifically can lead people to feeling uneasy in a house that has maybe a boiler problem. Yes, sometimes these things can be completely gaslighting. There was a lot, it's not just the term of trying to undermine someone, but the term gaslight. And the idea of gaslighting is because people couldn't trust their senses, because the chemicals within gaslighting was making people not get enough oxygen to their brains, and so people were having visions, or they died because they blew out the little blue flame that you're supposed to keep the pilot light going, and so then you just had carbon monoxide poisoning. There's all of these things that are like when we think about historically about what led to various hauntings, there's all kinds of atmospheric effects, and then there's all these other things that we don't know. We don't yet have a full understanding of perception, and each brain is so different. Each brain has a capacity for something that we would consider a sixth sense, but maybe it's also just hyper X, Y, and Z of R5. My partner's epileptic, and he has a very sensitive light. Uh, uh, um, Basically, he's very aware of different light conditions. He's aware of flickering light when no one else is able to see the cycling of it. And so he credits his ability to sometimes see an apparition as part of how his neurology is. And you'll find a lot of folks who are neurovariant, that will have all kinds of different experiences where they'll be tuned into things that other people might not see or experience. And I think that that's kind of that for me, that adds just how cool humanity is, because it's possible. All of these things are possible, and we're still trying to figure it out. So I'm somebody that doesn't need to have all the answers, and I feel bad for people who do, because I know it is uncomfortable not to have the answers, but at the same time, I kind of lean into the divine mystery of it. And also in certain ways, it's like I'm kind of glad I don't have to know all the answers. Like I don't need to know all of that now. And I try not to tell people what to think. I'll share what I believe, but I also try to let everyone have their own belief and experiences. And in your case, and again, so I am sorry for your losses. I also know it's startling in those moments, because even when it's a loved one, I still think one of the things that makes ghost stories kind of still startling and also terrifying in many ways is because the people and the possible appearance of the loved one or any of these things, yes, there might be emotions attached to it, but the way in which it occurs is startling. And so I don't want to ever be flippant about how I talk about the spectral, because for a lot of people, that uncanny moment is actually deeply, yes, it is unsettling. I say in my Spectral City series, my heroine is a psychic medium, and she says she deals with ghosts every day. It's part of her job. She's reporting to the NYPD. She's got the ghost precinct, and she has some ghost operatives as they try to solve weird crime in 1899 New York. And she says that even though she is aware that ghosts are part of her every day, that there's still creatures of startle and shock, and that she, even being as accustomed to it as she is, will still be startled and will still be unsettled. And I think that that's one of the allures to ghost lore, because it can be unsettling, because again, we don't have those answers, and it's a way for us to I think in a healthy manner, grapple with our own sense of mortality and our own fear of it. And so ghost stories can be both reassuring as the idea of something that's living on, the idea of that this corporeal form is not the end necessarily. And it can also serve as these cautionary tales like we're talking about. It can also serve as these markers. It can also serve as a way to make the past present, a way to seek justice if there was a spirit of somebody that was wronged. The idea that spirit is still haunting is a reminder to maybe a sense of justice that wasn't served, and maybe in time it will be. So I think that ghosts can be in so many different things depending on who needs them and when and why. So we talk a lot about the why of ghost lore in our nonfiction. I talk about kind of the heart of ghost lore in a lot of my fiction. So in the nonfiction, we're taking a lot of different examinations of ghost lore through time and sort of comparing and contrasting. In the case of A Haunted History of Invisible Women, it's, hey, how do we talk about women alive and dead? What are some of the stereotypes? How do some of these stories subvert those stereotypes? How do they conform to them? In America's Most Gothic, Haunted History Stranger Than Fiction, we're taking stories that seem like they could have been plucked right out of an Edgar Allan Poe tale, but are actual real stories. And then we say, all right, how does this perpetuate in our modern understanding, and breaking things down from the lens of Gothic literature and Gothic tropes that then apply to how you find a lot of common themes within our ghost lore. So we're all in conversation about all of these things.
Speaking of old New York, as a blended family, I moved into a brownstone in Park Slope in Brooklyn. And I believe the date on this structure was something like 1878 or something. It was an old, nice brownstone. So let's talk about a haunted residence. From almost the second we moved in, weird kind of stuff was going on, and not all of it good. You might like this story. I'm watching the movie Memento with my two kids. And there's a scene in the movie where, Guy Pearce, the protagonist who's moving backwards through the film because he's got amnesia,
Yep.
he opens up a closet and there's a guy in there with a broken nose who's all gauzed up. And he doesn't know why the guy is there, and he's got no context because he's got this memory problem. And right at that moment, we heard a boom, and my partner had fallen down a step or two and busted her nose at that very moment. So I remember hitting pause on the video. We rushed up to see it. She's bleeding. We rush her to the emergency room. And then when we come back hours later, the still image of the broken nose with the gauze is frozen on the screen, as if we were being taunted. Welcome to this house of horrors. You have no idea the lives that were lived here and the agonies that were endured. And you know what? Welcome to the party, pal.
Yeah.
And it was one of the roughest 2 years of my life. And as things were falling apart, the relationship, my career, I remember pacing across the creaking parquet flooring. And you love setting in your novels. You bring up that setting and intricate wooden parquet flooring. They don't do that anymore. The craftsmanship, the radon gas emanating from the brick, right? And I remember just pacing back and forth and feeling that kind of presence in this place. So I am with you 100% that places have character, that time and space are not absolute, that we interpret the world that we live in, and there's stuff going on. And you can say that we're making this up, but you know what? We make up reality as we live through it.
Absolutely. And you're right. Like I have been very blessed in that my experiences have been very kind for the most part. However, I have been in spaces just like what you're talking about where there is a negative energy or something that is part of the dynamic of what's happening in our lives that almost becomes a perpetuation of some energy that was unresolved in that space at that time. Again, that was a that whole area and that whole time frame was there was a lot happening, a lot of social change was happening, and it was a really very roiling time period then. And so I think that sometimes those energies kind of parallel with roiling times in our present life too, and it becomes a bit of a feedback loop in some cases. And 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 I've definitely had to kind of have a detente with some of the buildings that I know cause a real effect on me. However, I have to talk about them because they're on my tour. And I definitely I've spoken in both of the nonfiction books about what structures have given me pause and where and when, and the kind of boundary that I have to make. And I do encourage people who have had experiences where they're not feeling good about whatever energy or sense that they're getting to maintain their own psychic boundaries like you would with the living. If somebody is being abusive in your life, you need to set a boundary with them. Same thing kind of with the energy of the dead. I've had to sort of tell spirits to put things back that have taken things, or draw a line in the sand of do not startle me. I acknowledge that you're here. Do not startle me, and sort of be vocal about it. Because I do think that there is a conversation that needs to be had. And maybe it's just because there's just a desire to be acknowledged. Very often for me, the times when something has settled down, if it has been very, very active and annoying or possibly negative, is to acknowledge and then draw the line. Because I think sometimes it is something that's seeking to be seen or to be felt somehow. And a lot of times things will settle back down once it is acknowledged. And also when those boundaries are drawn, if something persists and it starts to get more and more and more intense, then that is when you call a professional of some kind, of whatever faith or non-faith you might feel could come into your place. That all of that is above my pay grade. So not me, but call someone you care about who has a good sense of energy. Come in and do something spiritual or fun and funny to just sort of like, it can be, it's like I try not to take myself too seriously. It's like you probably do an exorcism with like a game of Twister. It's just a matter of like just be intentional about it.
Yeah, and you got to be careful too. I was in Dachau, the concentration camp
Oof.
outside of Munich. It's a suburb of Munich. And
Yeah.
I was looking at a photo, and it was put in the corner of a building inside. And it depicted a mountain of clothes leaned against a wall in a corner. And then as I stood back, I realized that the corner I was standing in was the corner where the clothes were. And just like you mentioned, time suddenly had compressed, decades vanished, the space was the same, and I suddenly heard a humming in my ear. And it was a monotone, just a tone. It wasn't a crying or a laughing, it was just a tone. And then as I'm walking around the whole situation, it just kept steady, and it didn't dissipate until I physically left. As if, again, the connections, which are usually opaque, were becoming transparent. And my senses were tingling with the suffering. And I was reminded of the burden of history and my own sense of responsibility for not succumbing to some of the forces that led to this kind of tragedy. So there's stuff to be learned in all of this.
Absolutely. You describe a note, a tone in the air. That's exactly how that's that is also very similar to how charged places that are literally charged with an energy of the collected weight of human misery that was present in a space like that. It does create, for me, almost a frequency that can be heard. For other people, it will affect senses differently if you are at all open to it in a space like that. Um, I've had friends who've gotten very physically ill, very nauseous, and also just too. I mean, even that's not necessarily a spectral thing. If you have an open heart and you have empathy, you will be affected in spaces like that. You should be, and that's why it's a museum. Because some folks do need to feel that in order to let it land. Some people need to experience rather than just read about a tragedy to really make that implementation, like you're talking about. How can I make sure I'm standing against something like this happening again? How can I be trying to be mindful of that? Because other things are cyclical in our world. We're seeing things play out again. And it's very, very scary. But that's where we can take a certain amount of comfort in history, because there have always been people that have been standing for what is right and as just as anyone knows how to be. It's all very contextual. Um, but it's in it, and it gets really overwhelming, these kinds of things, these big existential topics. They get really, really daunting. A lot of times especially when I'm sitting down to write a book, I think, oh gosh, there's so much I want to say, and I realize I cannot say all of it, and I just have to focus, when it's nonfiction, on the building at hand and the person at hand, the angle I have chosen to take on this one chapter, because trying to thread all of it through, that's for some other comparative study course. And we're trying to be, armchair academics here, and we're tour guides. We don't have, doctoral degrees. And we're trying to make sure that we're leading our audiences through our stories. And with fiction too, I'm trying to, at the end of the day, have some action, have some adventure, have the good guys win the day, and hopefully have some food for thought along the way. But it's hard. Sometimes you get a little lost in the weeds, and so I end up going back to character. When people ask me, like, how do you break through in terms of like whether it's a writing whether it's a writer's block or whether it's just feeling completely daunted, as I often will, because again, we're talking about big things. I just go to character. I'm like, well, my character has a problem to solve. How do they solve it? That's when I get to lean on my acting and my performance background. Is I get to be the actor who's addressing how my main character is going to go through their moment and try to make it read for the audience slash the reader.
Tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about your Renaissance womanhood. You've got a lot going on. You're an actress, you're a writer. I met you through Matthew Kressel, who's also a wonderful writer. And how did that get activated? You've got books going back 15 years more.
Yeah,
You've got more than 40 books that I saw that are out there.
it's a lot.
Very impressive. You're
Thanks.
prolific. You've been doing this for a while. Where did the spark come from? And how do you express it in all these different ways? On the stage, with a pen, with a keyboard, and then you do your ghosting as well.
Yeah, it's
Tell us about you.
it's all about storytelling. Like my earliest art form was writing and performing, just whether it was just for family, and then later on it was for small regional theaters, in just like a community theater capacity, and then I went to school for theater. But all the while in the background I was writing the whole time. My first One of my first professional jobs was at the Ohio Renaissance Fair. So I was always interested in other time periods. Another one of my other earliest jobs was at the Ohio History Center, and so I was drawn to times not of this time because I felt like I had unfinished business. I didn't understand why I was so drawn to the late 19th century until somebody explained the concept of past lives to me when I was a teenager, and I was like, oh, that's why that's why this that era and the architecture and the clothing and everything feels so familiar, and also fraught. Like there it was not it's not a the 19th century was not an easy place to live if you were not a rich white man.
And I would venture to assume the 20th as well.
Well, yeah, a lot of that too, but we start to have there starts to be some rights in the 20th century. It starts to be some rights. But again, we can see how all of those rights we're having to keep fighting for and fighting for and fighting for. And so I had this sense that I was kind of a creature out of time. And I thought, all right, well, I have to tell stories. Um, and I have to tell as many of them as I can, and as quickly as I can. Ever since I was a kid, I felt this press, like a spectral hand on my back that was pressing me to tell stories. My earliest memories are of telling ghost stories to my Girl Scout troop and terrifying them. And I found a great sense of power in this. So I decided I was like, theater's the way. But then I spent 10 years as a professional actress. I went to school for theater. I trained with the Cincinnati Shakespeare Festival. I was doing a lot of period classical theater. I had 1 year where I just was every woman in Dracula. It was really great. The year of Dracula was a wonderful year, where I got to just channel one of my favorite books, right? But I got my Actors Equity card and I moved to New York City. I'd been doing regional theater primarily in Minneapolis for a while, great theater town. But when I got my equity card, I thought, okay, now it's time. I knew I was eventually going to hit New York City because I also knew that New York City was the capital of publishing. And here I'd been working on these novels in the background. And I thought maybe New York City can help me sort out if I can still be the jack of all trades that I want to be, or what's going to take precedence, what ultimately what's the thing I want most? Not that I necessarily had to always choose, because I go back and forth. I choose all of the storytelling venues, but you do sometimes have to focus on one versus the other depending on your deadlines or your rehearsal schedule. And so I was at a Broadway callback, and all I could think about was the book that would become my debut novel, Strange and Beautiful. And I thought, if I'm at a Broadway callback and I'm thinking about anything else, and everyone else at that Broadway callback was only thinking about that Broadway callback, and I thought, this is telling. This is telling. And I needed something at that level. I needed something I could walk away from. Like, all right, I've gotten to the Broadway callback level. Now I can walk away from this a little bit. Sort of, check that one off the bucket list of like, all right, well, I'm good enough to have gotten here, but I will forever regret not focusing on Miss Percy Parker and her story. And so that became my debut novel in 2009. And when I made that shift, I had been querying that like in the background for a really long time. And when I made the shift and started networking and going to um, uh, uh, writers groups meetings, attending KGB Fantastic Fiction, which is where I met Matthew Kressel, starting to sort of say, okay, here I am here as also as a novelist, and kind of putting that foot forward, garnering critique groups, doing revisions on the novel to get it to the point where I could query an agent, and they did take it on. And within about a year and a half after I made that shift, I did have my first publication contract. And since then, I have placed my novels first and foremost, and then my theatrical world secondary. And the ghost tour guide stuff works in nicely. It's a very seasonal job, so it's not something that's preoccupying me all the time. So I do have these sort of cyclical periods where, all right, I'm going to focus on a show thing here, or I'm going to focus on a book thing here, whether it's a novella or a full length novel, or maybe I'm going to be a narrator for a while. So some of the 40 that you mentioned are novellas that I've narrated, and so that's been a fun little other aspect of things that I like to do. So and it brings the performance aspect of my life back into the fore as well, and it's a kind of a nice synergy. So. A lot of it for me is just I'm a freelancer, and I've been a freelancer for such a long time, and I have all these things that I love doing, and it has beautifully, and I'm very grateful that it's all kind of been towards the same direction, even though they are different companies and they're different contracts and they're different time frames. All of it is very ghostly and uh, Gothic, spectrally inclined, which is very much who I am as a person. I'm usually always in some kind of regalia, and when people are like, "Is that a costume?" and if you get to know me, you're like, "No, that's just not. That's just how she is. She just shows up in regalia, and that's just it's just that past life shining through of like this is what's comfortable for me." And people are like, "Do you have a pair of jeans?" And I'm like, "Yes." When I was doing background work for film and television, I couldn't like go into work doing background work for Gossip Girl wearing my Gothic Victorian regalia, so I had to have a pair of jeans. So friends are like, "Wait, so your pair of jeans is your costume?" Yes, yes, it is. So, I was basically trying to figure out what can I want to dress like a Victorian widow, my every day. What career path can I take to make that doable? So here I am.
Well, the persona fits and it works. And it's you. Stylistically, what I get from your prose is this whimsical horror. The way you juxtapose a shocking happening with a very almost goofy sensibility, not always, but in a lot of your stories, that's my takeaway from reading your stuff,
I
which
love
is
that.
you're always balancing the absurdity of life, the fantastical nature of your storytelling. It's meta, it's postmodern in the sense that you're very self-aware of the storytelling and you're having fun with it, you're playing with it. So the wall comes down, it goes back up. You wink at the reader, and sometimes you wink at your own characters, which I think is cool. And as a writer myself, I have that sensibility, which is like, I see what she did there, and it's fun, and sometimes shocking fun, and sometimes funny shocking fun, and sometimes cringe shocking funny fun. And it's in that juxtaposition that I think you've got your own distinctive voice, which is you're hard to pin down even though you're specific in that way. There's a lot of other things infused, including a sense of historical context. There's a value driven point of view. You do have your sense of right and wrong, and it comes through your characters and the stories and their resolution or not. And I think that that's great. You're a very mindful writer in that way. You're not just cranking it out because cozy fantasy is trending now. You've got your own voice.
Thank you. I am so honored by your words, because it's it's the thing you kind of hope for as a writer, to be seen and heard in these ways, and to be read, and to be uh valued in all the ways that you just said, without trying to craft it. Like, voice, you know this. Voice is something you can't teach. You just kind of have to let it percolate, let it simmer, and let it come out, and see what it looks like on the other side of it. And I am the product of everything that I have mentioned. It all goes in there. And I think that winking and the self-awareness, I think that's where the theatricality comes in. It's like, I know I'm staging this for you, the reader. And especially because I'm dealing with Gothic themes, the Gothic is extraordinarily self-aware. And if I'm not aware of the Gothic being self-aware, then it's just going to read like I'm trying too hard. If I don't know that I'm over the top, then it's going to read as over the top. And you're not going to see that metatextual thing like you talked about, which, it's all of my Gothic foremothers were very aware of what they were doing, and how each Bronte sister was writing a different metatextual narrative with ghosts through time, and art, and also the pain and the plight of a very, very fraught society then, and how different marginalizations would play out in each of their respective cases. And so I was just very aware that a lot of my favorite fiction was also pretty self-aware. One of my favorite novels is Gaston Leroux's Phantom of the Opera, which is very, very aware of itself. It knows it's telling you a story that it's saying is a true story, which, yes, is based on a couple of things that were in fact found below the Paris Opera House. But he's crafting this very self-aware, very theatrical narrative. And that was really, I imprinted really early on a lot of the very self-aware Gothics. Oscar Wilde, Picture of Dorian Gray. There's a lot of commentary in there. There's a lot of stuff. Edgar Allan Poe, great author at talking about about society and snarking at it, and often, and there's some pieces of his that are really funny, in addition to the stuff that's absolutely harrowing. And so I think that, just for me, the being somebody who's drawn to this time period as a kid with this unfinished business angle, reading books set in the 19th century that made me feel like made me feel at home because of whatever unfinished business was driving this soul, meant that I needed to make sure that I was doing that. Okay, now here I am, X amount of 100 years later. How am I still making that accessible for a modern audience with modern editorial standards that are not going to let me have a paragraph long sentence a la Henry James? I just went through this with my editor, bless her patient heart, at Hachette. I have a young adult novel coming out next February called Ravenfield Hall, and it is a young adult retelling, mixing elements of Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca with Daphne du Maurier's Jamaica Inn, but setting it in 1874 on the coast of southern Maine, and bringing in actual real history of the fact that there was land pirates, much like in Jamaica Inn. There were land pirates along that coast of southern Maine, and bringing in a spectral ghost ship angle to vengeance about all of those things. And my heroine being very well aware that she is living a Bronte novel as sort of a governess character in this haunted house. And so, and I am, again, very metatextual in that I've named my character Agnes, and she is named for Agnes Grey, and her mother said that's what I was reading when I had you. So, and she's aware that these things are playing out around her. So I think for me, if I wasn't paying homage, then it would probably seem like I was trying to reinvent the wheel rather than just pay homage while still doing my own thing. Because I think if I didn't, if I wasn't explicit about these things, then it would just seem like I was trying to get one over on people. And I'm not. I'm trying to sort of say, hey, here's my take on Du Maurier. Here's something I can add to this because I'm inspired by my foremothers, and here's what I have to say about it as someone who lives in this country, in this time period, with a pointed discussion of working class solidarity So there's you can tell my solidarity forever. That just kind of just it's the little song in the background of all of my work.
There's some self-referential campiness to it too, which is dress up time. We know that we're mimicking and emulating conventional society, and in your case, 19th century conventional society. And when you infuse it with zany and horrific, narcissistic, exploitative, but also empathetic and deep characters, you get a great creative cauldron of fun. And sometimes this magic happens on screen. It's relatively rare. The last time I felt that was Poor Things,
Oh,
that film,
oh yeah.
which had you laughing and cringing simultaneously. And that's the good stuff, especially when it comes to Gothic genre driven drama where it's layered, it's oozing, it's this pousse cafe of emotion and history and storytelling. And you can feel it in your gut. It's really filling. And sometimes it's so filling you want to barf, and like a tainted cheese. You get hungry again right after, and then you just want to eat more cheese. And it's in a sense this expiation that you're going through with the creator, who's feeling that same mixture of agony and ecstasy that really hit home, and it's just so rich.
That's the crux of the Gothic.
Turn the pages, or you can't stop looking at it. You do one of these where you're just
Yeah.
peering through a nightshade, so to speak.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. I love this. I love all of this because it is exactly. I am. I am in love with the really lush, rich, sumptuous nature of the Gothic, but it is always on that perilous precipice where just when you think you're safe, something else is going to threaten that safety. And it's usually very dramatic and it's usually very dizzying. I love that the Gothic is always having you test your senses. And as someone who likes to be a very sensory writer, that's kind of my favorite moment to sort of walk you through this fever dream and see how just how dangerous the footing can and can't be, while still allowing like the what I want for my books is for them to be a cathartic experience and for people to be able to feel deeply, but also though to know that they are safe and that there are certain things that I will not do in my books. I do not do stuff for shock value alone. I will have a very, very grim situation, but I try not to put my female coded characters in positions of particular violences because I think that's overdone. I try to make sure that I'm not doubling down on traumas for marginalized people. I try to showcase that there are threats for everyone, but I try to be aware of everything in sort of their measure of not making anyone helpless in their situations. I do have a big cast of characters, and it's diverse because my stories take place in cities, and they have always been diverse. And so it for people to have a completely homogenous city it is not that's not historically accurate. And so I do make sure I hire sensitivity readers for things outside of my experience, and try to kind of create a Scooby Gang of characters from all different backgrounds. They each have their own gift and perspective to bring to the table, and because I think that's the only way any problem gets solved. And usually, I mean, I do very often. I mean, I do have a hero and a heroine. So sometimes it does come down to the two people at the center of it, and sometimes it's a romantic, and sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's just purely a story of a group of friends who care about each other who save the day. And it does not always have to have a romance in it. Many of my books do, but not all of them do. or if there is something, it's in the background and it's not uh, uh, the main crux of the goings on. And some of that just depends on which house has bought it and whether or not they wanted to be buying a romance or whether they wanted to be buying just a fantasy. And because I like both, and so sort of sometimes it's been like, hey, what do you want to hey, editor, I like working with you, what do you want to work on? And so that's actually how Ravenfield Hall happened, was because the editor said, I would like to do this, and I thought I would like to do this, and we sort of built a book we wanted to work on together, which was a delight, because we were both excited about the Gothic themes and what could we make that, how could we create that and craft that for a modern teen audience, while still letting it be a period piece. And yeah, you spoke to something about the cross genre nature of my work, and that is one of the reasons why I think I have not broken out bigger as a writer, is because it is hard to pin me down. And every editor and every agent of mine has had the same difficulty of, where do we shelve you? How do we shelve you? Because you are 5 genres in a trench coat. And I've tried to shift and just do one thing and just be like, no, I'm just going to write a straight up thriller or a straight up mystery or whatever. And I cannot. I've tried. You can ask my agent. I tried to just do a modern romantic suspense story, a contemporary romantic suspense story. And then the editor looking at it was like, this is just a thinly veiled Gothic novel. Just like, no, this is not what we need for our line. And so I kind of, I've tried. I want to be, I'm interested in, like, I have tried writing a dystopia, and I have written a slight dystopia. One of my novellas is a parallel steampunk and modern dystopia, or a futuristic dystopia rather. So I've experimented here or there, but any of the things that's gotten traction for me has just been what is most authentic to myself, which is 5 gaslamp fantasy-esque genres in a trench coat, and you're going to get a little bit of each, and then the nonfiction is really that's where my best sales numbers have been, to tell you the truth, and I'm grateful for it, because that has helped fuel everything else. Hitting the bestseller list, the USA Today bestseller list with America's Most Gothic, was a real feather in Andrea and I's cap, and I'm really, really, really grateful, as somebody who wants to be known as both a goth and Gothic novelist. That hitting with that title felt like it felt like the universe was taking care of me in that moment of like, okay, this is good for your brand, as it were. Not that I need it to be branded necessarily, but there is, considering that it's so hard to pin down my genres, pointing in at least the Gothic direction has been helpful for both the industry and for me connecting to readers.
I wear the same trench coat. So in addition to bald podcasting, I write too. And then I'm wearing a trench coat, and then I flash, and out pops hard science fiction, fantasy, horror, humor, historical fiction, social commentary, a love story among Zoomers, the history of crypto and quantum mechanics, and it's fast. So I'm shifting gears, and I'm just throwing it down. And even Amazon bumps me in genres. I
Yeah.
put it in as hard science fiction, and
Yeah.
then they move me to fantasy, which I guess is this bucket where we don't know what the hell this is, but we got to put it somewhere. And it makes it very difficult for people to even understand my intent,
Right.
because they're not used to this kaleidoscopic explosion of just storytelling. Yeah, I got some Douglas Adams, and I've got some William Gibson, and some Thomas Pynchon, and some Hunter S. Thompson. But even that trivializes when I talk to writers. I don't like to pigeonhole them. You sound just like Ray Bradbury meets John Updike. And they're like, get the fuck out of here with that. And they're right, which is, we want to be unique. We want our own
Yep.
voice. And if you're a good writer, you got your own voice. But to your point, you and I have a voice that doesn't like to settle into a trope because we're constrained. I got a lot on my mind. And this character and this story is very compelling. And I just heard the news, and our world is on fire, led by madmen. And I'm channeling that bullshit into my story. I'm not going to write some tale that's utterly devoid of social and ethical context. There's a lot going on, and I want the story to be reflective of how I feel in this moment. So deal with it.
Absolutely. It's all art is political, and it always has
Yes.
been. And you can't, if you are not writing, if you are actively not trying to engage, that too is a political choice. So that too is politics. And there's no, we're all informed by everything that's happening around us all the time. And I'm you are the perfect person to kind of break this down because of your own cross genre nature. Yeah, I was like, I was going to ask you, I was like, how would you, like, how do you, because of all the different subgenres that you do, when you pitch your own work, what are the, you can't pin it down to one word, and you can't necessarily even pin it down to one genre term. So what do you tend to say? Because you got to have at least a full sentence, right? How do you tend to pitch yourself?
Several elevator pitches. I've been to several of the book selling fairs,
Yeah.
LA Comic Con, Pasadena Comic Con, LA Festival of Books, which, by the way, was the best because you've got readers. If
Yeah.
you go to a con, people are doing cosplay, and they don't really give a shit about a novel. Generally, I remember just like science fiction, fantasy, you guys like it, and they're like, they stream it, they don't read it. So the LA Festival of Books was terrific, and I adjusted the elevator pitch based on what I was sensing the reader was looking for. So I've got a black and white kitty cat in a bathtub on the cover, and some of them were just drawn. They thought it was a cat story. So I talked about Bernie Sanders and Sandy Burns, the mirror kitty cats in the multiverse in the story, and they liked that. And there's a story of Zoomers, like the battle between men and women is acute right now. Young women are doing very well, and young men are incels in a basement vaping and playing video games. And I focus on that struggle and that dichotomy as a theme in my book. And then I have a transcendent Boltzmann brain, which is this self generated consciousness in a dying universe that gets the keys to reality. So if I see someone's a nerd, I talk about the Alice character who is manipulating reality, the ultimate magician. And if they're a Zoomer and they seem to be interested in their kind, then I'll adjust accordingly. But that's actually the strength of not playing to a genre or a trope, where we're disadvantaged a lot of the time because people want to know what they're getting. But
Mhm.
at the same time, it gives us flexibility to morph into what folks might like and draw them in that way. And your books lend themselves very much to that because you've got you've got saucy romance, you've got horror, you've got intrigue, you've got mystery, you've got crime.
And it's interesting, the main thing that becomes a blockade for some people is because most of my books are historical. So if that can be a deal breaker for some readers. It's like you have to be willing to see that this is a historic setting. And I don't write with the density of the Victorians, but I write with a I write with a complexity that makes you feel like it can be from the Victorian era. I have made a sort of a modern compromise about what is, and then this is always a discussion with my editors about, all right, how can I sort of declutter my prose from a Victorian sensibility of, Dickensian paid by the word kind of situation. That's not what I'm going for. But I am trying to go for a lush and hopefully high vocabulary kind of book that's going to make you feel like you are in a drawing room in the 19th century. um to give that sense of it is a different language, it is a different time period and usage of turns of phrase. um and then everything else is sort of like, okay, as long as you're cool with historical, then you get every other I will touch down in just about every other genre that exists within that historical context. And so I also will get a read on people. So do you like there to be a little bit more romance forward in it? Okay, great. Then I'm gonna shift you towards Strange and Beautiful and the Spectral City. Even
Yeah.
and if you like a little bit more grittier, a little darker and grittier, big cast of characters, big, international intrigue, then I describe my Eterna files as Victorian X Files. And so I'll have little turns of phrase that I'll use, Victorian Ghostbusters, Victorian X Files, my little Victorian Ghost Precinct. And coming up, I've got, just a straightforward young adult Gothic with romance right at the fore as well. So I'll ask about but because I am writing for young adults and adults, I am also very clear that I keep to a PG-13 content range in my work, because I have 9-year-olds reading my work and also adults. And, I love the idea that a grandmother and a granddaughter could be reading my book and see characters that represent both of them in there, because I also have a wide range of ages in my books. But I do keep to that PG-13 content, but both because my voice suits best that way, and also because I don't want there to be, because I am writing under my real name, and I'm writing for an audience that I want to be really, really broad, and I don't want there to be something that is jumping into content that one of my young readers would feel really uncomfortable with, or a caretaker would feel really uncomfortable with, while still trying to make sure I'm not talking down to anybody in my work. But that kind of PG-13 range helps me to where everything else is really, really broad brush. I'm able to kind of feel like my voice already self constrains into that into that kind of range. I don't feel constrained by it. I feel like I can say all kinds of really, really sweet and sensual things, or actually really terrifying things. And I myself kind of like some of the really true, either spicy stuff or the really true horrific stuff. For me, I like that to be off the page, and like allow for there to be a little bit of room for imagination from the reader. So, but also for the people that want the really, really, really explicit stuff, they're not going to find that in my work. Or if they want it to be just, hot, lot of blood and high slasher content, I love horror, but that's just not going to be that's not going to be my writing. My writing is going to have a fairly hopeful, happy ending, because that's where I want my brain to go. Not that I'm not going to take people through horror in the meantime. Some of my short stories are pure horror, only because I'm kind of leaving the reader with kind of an unsettling consequence for something that's happened. I actually realized that all of my short fiction is all pretty much straight up genre horror, because it's sort of like a becoming. It's usually like, this is like coming of age stories. Well, I feel like my short stories are coming of monster stories, where something happens and then my characters have become something else, usually something otherworldly, generally speaking, to take vengeance. And usually they're right. So they're my horror stories are very cathartic, because there is still like, it's sort of a happy ending if for the person enacting the vengeance.
Very Edgar Allan Poe-esque, and in true post-Elizabethan Victorian style, you make readers work a little bit, and you're not overt. You leave things to the imagination, which heightens the drama and the suspense and gets your readers more involved too, without just giving away the goose. So I think that's a good technique. And you indulge a little bit. I just wrote an essay that I threw up on Substack, and people got annoyed. I know I triggered a good writer friend of mine, and she was like, "You're attacking me," and I go, "I'm not attacking you. I'm expressing my opinion." So the essay was called "Show, Don't Tell." Yeah, I tell you to kiss my ass, and the point I'm making is, we're living in an era of workshopped fiction where you can almost see the annotation from the editor. Now there's developmental editors. And it's like, can you externalize this a little bit more? Everything is cinematic. Everything is behavioral. We're not allowed to set up the soapbox and pontificate. We're not allowed to introduce historical elements. We're not allowed to indulge our values and just let the reader have it. And I just don't buy it. I think that clearly their access is in the other direction, and show don't tell is a great general piece of advice, especially for writers who are learning the craft. But I say you let it loose. You gotta just do what feels right. And you do that to a certain extent. I think your prose is tight. You often not so much pontificate, but your point of view is crystal clear about this historical situation. The characters are within it. You're letting the bad guys have it. There's a lot of satisfaction. And your heroes, often heroines, are victorious in a way that reinforces, I think, your point of view about what constitutes a true and just and fair society. Is that fair?
Well, absolutely. And I think where the show don't tell thing is helpful is I do a lot of telling. I just try to have the telling happen in a moment that's still active. And I found, especially because I was trying to make sure that my young adult, so I just went through this exact thing with having a back and forth with an editor about, okay, wanting to make sure I am making the point about this working class woman who is struggling. She's 18 years old, and she is an adult before she's ready to be kind of thrown into the deep end of a situation, trying to kind of solve a problem with another young man who has also been put into a position of responsibility, and thrown right into the deep end of adulthood, also needing to be a caregiver, and a lot writing, a lot of pressure writing on these young people, when they feel like all the adults have failed them. And I feel like that's kind of very relevant for a lot of our society right now, and especially considering that both of these characters fell victim to predatory uh, predatory practices, of a lack of regulation in the stock market. So I have this set in a year after the great financial panic of 1873. So in 1874, there's an enormous recession, and so it kind of rivaled the Great Depression, and it was really, really, really devastating for all kinds of folks across class. And so there's these two people who are under the thumb of really nasty characters, and or who have lost everything, who are just trying to literally survive. And so I have to kind of give a sense of why the intensity is there, why the dislike of the people who are perpetuating the problem is so visceral for the characters. I have to talk about why. So there's going to be a little bit of telling there, but having it come up in moments when they're confronted by this person who's representing everything that they hate, and everything, greed incarnate is standing in front of them, and they're going to have some thoughts about it, and it's not the appropriate time to push back just then, so they have to go vent about it. So I think that those moments to tell in the interior narrative, I'm just trying to make sure that those are very active. Also, that if I were playing that on stage, you as the audience wouldn't necessarily know what my internal monologue was, but I would need to make that clear in my expression, turning away, letting the audience see something that the character couldn't see. I'm just going to make that textual in my story, but that's still an active point. So that for me is where I try to make sure that the soapbox is on wheels and is going in the same direction as the action.
100%. It's got to be contextually relevant, and it's infused with the action and augments it.
Right.
If it acts in isolation, then the train is left the tracks.
Right.
You've got a momentum as a storyteller. and
Right.
it's immersive. And if you break the continuity to pontificate and to bloviate, you're blowing it. But if the rant is relevant and it further reinforces the mood and zeitgeist of that moment in the narrative, I think you're okay.
I tend I tend to make a lot of those moments where I really need to say something. I tend to make that dialogue where the character is about to burst and they just have to say it. Because if they're saying it, then that in and of itself is an active choice. Rather than it being the narrator, making sure that you understand the point of this cross class consciousness that I would like for you to, no, like make that very real for the character because they're thinking about because they're the one that's under the thumb of this greedy person who's trying to take further advantage of someone's precarious situation. So, I feel like um the I I like the discussion about these kinds of things about where and when for sort of the show don't tell because I really do like to be a lush, very big wordy prose kind of person, but I don't want that to get in the way. So I like having these discussions because it does always make sure I'm checking to make sure that when I do go into a very atmospheric passage, that it's one that I've kind of earned, or that it's a moment where we can take a moment to breathe, and that the pacing allows it in those moments. Because a lot of times I'll get so focused on character that I will lose sight of my pacing if I'm not careful. So that's one of the things that I always have to. I think that's just an actor thing, where it's like I'm in actor mode and I'm not stepping back and being a director. And I think that I'm always in conversation with the various theatrical parts of my life and career whenever I'm sitting down with a book. And so the more I can be shifting out of actor mode and into more staging mode and director mode, that's actually when I can be doing better work on the story as a whole, and hopefully can address some things before my editor comes to it. But then sometimes I can't see the forest for the trees, and that's why I am very grateful to have editors along the way. I couldn't imagine my career without the incredible editors that I've had along the way, seeing the potential in what I do and just trying to hone it and just trying to make sure it is hitting the best as possible. When we got a chance to do the revised version of Strange and Beautiful, I was so grateful because these were my first books. I had made a lot of mistakes in my first book. So when Tor picked up the backlist of Strange and Beautiful after Dorchester Publishing had gone bankrupt, this was, speaking of another financial crisis, right? 2008 hit. And then there was a whole lot of disruptions in the industry, as in the publication industry, as you know. And here I was, I just started my career and I'd been a Barnes and Noble bestseller and I was into 4 print runs and like right away and, like tens of thousands of copies of my first little mass market paperback. And then suddenly I was out of print. And suddenly it was like, and $60,000 I will never see later or something. I mean, I actually don't exactly know how much the royalties I will never see, were, because those statements never came. But I stayed in it. I stayed in the business. I was not going to let someone else's financial mistakes, take away my joy. So I powered through. And then when Tor bought Eternophiles, they were like, "Hey, whatever happened to Strange and Beautiful?" I was like, I have the rights. Would you like them?" And they republished. And that was wonderful because they kind of pitched it as, this is a foundation work of gaslamp fantasy, because it had come out in 2009, the same year as Gail Carriger's Parasol Protectorate series. And there's a bunch of other like gaslamp fantasy that started to kind of really get going around that time period. And I was in some really good company there. So I felt really lucky that I got a chance to go back and re-edit alongside Melissa Singer, who was the editor who picked that up at the time. And then we got a chance to finish the series, which had never been finished prior. So I've had these wonderful kinds of moments where the career has been like this, but it will sometimes dovetail and come back on itself to come back to something. And I feel, even though I've had a lot of setbacks career wise, just because the industry is full of unpredictable things, I've also just tried to stay with it and maintain my connections and maintain a sense of good spirit about all of it. And I'm just grateful to still be published. I don't take that for granted for a second because it's a rough industry.
Very rough. And you mentioned a critical core component of it, which is the human networking. I had another writer said it's not networking, Mookie, it's making friends. I
It is.
had CSE CUNY
Yep,
on the
it is.
podcast, and she's great. She's just effervescing with energy and enthusiasm. I go, so I go out there, Mookie, and I make friends, and I'm like, you go, girl. That is awesome, because she is just effervescing, and she participates in writers clubs. She goes to ReaderCon, and she's engaged. And it sounds like you have a very good social network of other writers and agents and editors, and you're living the dream, but it's not on an island. And I think that's important for especially up and coming writers to know that it's not like you're Dostoevsky toiling in the cold basement and then you write a book, you sell it, then you go gambling and whoring, and then you're destitute again, and then you write another book, rinse, repeat. There's a process here. There's a community, and you're wired into it, which is cool.
Absolutely. And it's definitely one of those things where if you want people to show up for you, you do need to show up for them. And so it is one of those things where um making sure that you are also just genuinely it doesn't mean you have to be genuine friends and full besties with everybody that you meet in the industry. It's not possible. Nobody has time for that. But being genuine with people and genuinely interested in what other people are doing, and being supportive in the way that you would want to be supportive, um, and then just making sure that like you are operating with a certain sense of generosity, rather than a skepticism about, I've had experiences where other authors have been jealous of me, for this, that, or the other, and that's just not a good vibe. I mean, I understand it's part of the industry, but it's not good to sit with, and it does not create good lasting relationships if that's somewhere in there, someone trying to kind of get one over on somebody, or just trying to be use the person as a stepping stone, or any of those kinds of things. Just as long as you're being a community member lifting everyone up, I do believe in the rising tide floats all boats kind of situation. And I won't overextend myself if I can't. If someone's asking me to blurb a book, like right now I'm at my blurb capacity. Everyone, I have done as many blurbs as I can do this year, and I am overbooked on that. So I will say I'm so sorry I can't this year. Check in with me in a future for a future project, because I don't want to over commit or over promise. And so I think that's another thing too, is just for folks who are really eager, yes, but just know your own limits and make sure you are not over promising, so that you can meet and make your deadlines, because hard work will out, and so one of the reasons why I have had good editorial relationships is because I do work hard and I do always turn my stuff in on time. Obviously there's stuff that's like, life can happen and things like that, and industry schedules change too, and that's certainly been the case. um but I think as much as we can be seen as people who are good to work with, who are fun to work with, who do understand that there's a whole lot of stuff that is out of an editor's control, so can be understanding and empathetic to their situation. Editors are really under the gun right now. They're overworked, they're underpaid. It's a very stressful situation. A lot of the editorial force has been laid off. So having an empathy for that too, even though it's our work that's on the line and we're emotional about it too, knowing that like at the end of the day, there's another human being on the other side of that keyboard who is going to be reading your stressed out email. And that's, agents are great in kind of mitigating that too. And so having a good relationship with an agent who can kind of be your intercessor in the stressful things is very important too. But I think, going into this knowing that we're not at odds. What is at odds is the forces that are trying to make us feel irrelevant right now, and there's a lot of disdain for the arts that has been very painfully apparent in a lot of the discussions of whether it's tech bros or whether it's or just in general, just politics not valuing art either. And that's a hard thing, to have your work be devalued. And I had a lot of my works stolen by Anthropic, like the rest of my colleagues. So,
We all got ripped
we
off.
all got ripped off, and we're mad about it.
Everything got Pac-Maned into
Yeah,
the large
yeah,
language model. Waka 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 waka
exactly right.
waka.
And we're mad about it, and we're justifiably mad about it.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the same time, um, we can be aware of all of these things that are making our our lives more difficult, um, and not helping the planet or each other, by all of that greed. But I cannot let them steal my joy. That's been a consistent conversation I've been having with everyone, with my editor, with my agent, with everyone in publishing. Is I'm not going to let anyone steal my joy. I'm not going to let anyone steal my love of writing. They stole my works, but to train there's bullshit. But they're not going to steal my joy or my voice or my creativity, because you cannot replicate that. You cannot replicate. Folks can plagiarize, but they cannot replicate. And so I feel like that's one of the things I don't want artists to feel like they need to do, is like what you were saying earlier, which is to sort of write by committee, because that's going to start to sound like it's an output from a large language model. And that's no, be weird, be weird, be unique. Um, know that you're still structurally going to have to attend to all the things that make a good novel. You're still going to have pacing. You're still gonna, like any of the things that we were just talking about, of like, yes, by all means, sometimes you get to tell. Sometimes you just get to do that, and deploy it as needed, but deploy it carefully. I don't think there's any one hard and fast rule about anything, as long as there is sort of a moderation of, okay, well, I'm going to let myself indulge in this sequence right here. I know it is a little wordy, and I know we're pausing here maybe a little longer than is necessary, but no, I'm actually going to push back against editorial saying this is taking a little long. And I'm like, no, I like this one. But I pick my battles. I pick my battles, because you can't do that about everything. Because for the most part, my editors are always right. I'll allow myself a couple of moments where I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm being indulgent right here. And I know that I'm being indulgent, but I'm choosing to be indulgent right here, because I do think that sometimes we need to make sure we do hold on to what is uniquely ours. Right now, publishing is very afraid of rocking boats, and I understand that. But at the same time, I want to make sure I'm still really staying true to my voice as best as possible. Not that it's the be all and the end all, but finding that right balance of what sits right with me. What's versus what do I feel now it's become something else. And if it's become something else, then I need to bring it back towards what still feels like it's me.
We can fight the AI by being as human as possible. And
Mhm.
what is humanity? We're irrational, we're impulsive. We could be shitty to each other, just like you're describing. We're jealous, envious. We swim in these contradictions, and that's awesome. So you GPT, you're a matrix math driven language model. There's zero sentience or soul or self-awareness, at least not yet. The architecture probably doesn't even allow it. So let's stop fooling ourselves and stop acting like this homogeneous army of mediocrity that's obeying all the rules all the time. Can't do this, can't do that. The greatest artists learn the rules, honor them like a pro, and then break them like a true artist if you
Yeah.
know what you're doing. And
Yeah.
then there's the cohabitation. There's the courtesy of a community. Sam Robb is another author I had a couple weeks ago. He's with Raconteur Press. Now he's jumped over to the military sci-fi people, and he's done one of the first fantasy books for Celine Press. It's a
Nice.
newer outfit. And he posted on Substack a few rules of engagement, because he does a lot of editing work.
Yeah.
He wears both hats. He's an editor and a writer. He goes, "Why is your manuscript rejected?" So don't take it personal right away. And he's got a few reasons. Reason number one, it really does suck. It's like put put it through a spell check, get your grammar right. It's a mess. Learn how to write. That's rule number one. You can't write. Rule number two is you just wrote this splatter vampire horror comedy and you sent it to a cozy romance publisher. Why?
Sabotage yourself by not reading the submission guidelines.
Not bothering or giving a shit who you're throwing your stuff at.
Seriously.
Now I'm the number two guy. I do that. So I restacked Sam's little advice sheet and I go, hey, I'm number two. I just had an idea for a spin-off prequel to my science fiction extravaganza. I bang out the plot summary in 3 chapters, so I'm playing by the rules in the industry. And then I just blast it to 20 people indiscriminately, publishers, editors, everybody. I obviously get 20 different reactions, but I'm the number two guy, which is like, what do you think? And the reactions have been proportionally diverse and eccentric, but I like that. Just
You're
let
an
it
agent.
out.
You're an agent of chaos. No, my agent would never let that. She would never okay that.
Oh, I know. That's why I bring it up. I'm not advocating this as a contrarian best practice. It's just not a good idea.
I just think, but I also think it's hilarious that you did it.
At least now.
I and honestly, like that's the other thing too. It's like the folks are still going to shoot their shot, and if that works for you, kudos, and you get to be the exception. You get to be the exception to that rule next time you talk to him. If that does go forward, it could be, there always are exceptions to rules, but
yeah, and retroactively, famous people knew all along that everything they did was genius. Someone asked Rosie, how come you were a DJ before you became a world famous actress? And go, what kind of stupid question is that?
Right.
I had to pay the rent. I got a job. I was a DJ. Sam Jackson did puppet theater in Central Park.
Yep.
Right? Why? Because he knew that he would be a world famous actor? No, it's just you do what you do and then see what happens.
That's kind of been my strategy of just sort of like following where things lead. And a lot of times, as long as it's something that you feel that you want to be doing, I've led both with needs must, but also here's where I want to be going. And even if it's not the end step, at least it's towards that next step. I realized that because of a change in the publication schedule, Ravenfield Hall, originally when it was bought, it was supposed to come out this fall. And then it got moved to February of 2027, which meant I didn't have a fall release. And I try to have, I mean, you noted I've got a bunch of things out. I try to have something out every year if possible. Now, the nonfiction takes so much research and so much time to build. So that slows things down if it's a nonfiction set of years. But in terms of the fiction, I try to have a fiction out every year if possible. In this case, I won't have a fiction, not a full length. I'll have some shorts, but a full length fiction won't be out this year. So I've thought, okay, well, what is something that I can control timing wise? So I've been drafting a one-woman show about Victorian spiritualism that I hope to have drafted and at least try to have some kind of first performance by the fall. Again, sometimes depending on schedules, because I'm spinning about 9 different plates and we'll sort of see what needs precedence. But I've been hoping to have this show about Victorian spiritualism where I would be a spiritualist talking about the movement of the 19th century obsession with talking to the dead. And then the idea of channeling a few famous women of history in this sort of 45-minute presentation where it would be sort of a performative lecture about the 19th century seance movement and why it was important to women's rights, and then trot out a few interesting women of history in a little trance-like state and sort of get a chance to, do that in a performative way that could be fun. And then have a little bit of room for talk back about what are we, as we are here in this modern era, what can we be we be tapping into from the past to inspire us about how to go forward. And so that's something that I can control in the midst of other things. But I really like deadlines, and I like deadlines that are sort of given to me from publishing houses or from theater companies or something like that. So doing the self appointed deadline stuff and self-producing is a little bit harder for me. But I've been talking about it very publicly as sort of a accountability practice.
I do that too. I bloviate about stuff I'm going to do, and I'm like, oh shit, I just told everybody
Now
that
I
I'm
got to do it.
almost done.
See,
Now
yeah,
I
yeah.
got to
I had a
finish this
feeling.
up.
Yeah, yeah.
Deadlines are good too. I saw Margaret Atwood give a talk. She did the circuit. And the point she kept repeating was deadline, deadline, deadline.
Yeah.
Writers need a deadline. If you're just floating in space, woohoo, you end up like Douglas Adams, frankly, the Hitchhiker's Guide guy, where you're writing garbage like Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency because you've got no accountability. Everyone thinks you're a genius. You're held up to high expectation. You got a bunch of money, more money than you had before. They're making movies of your stuff, and you look at the page and the keyboard, and all life has been sucked out of you because you're just not accountable anymore. I think we all need a whip in a chair in some way. We need that fire under our ass to keep us driven and motivated and accountable.
And it's not that we don't love what we do. It's just that a lot of times for me, I love what I do, but my brain is very nonlinear. So it just needs some kind of external tether to make sure that I then have some kind of executive function that kicks in at some point to get something done. Because again, it's not like I don't love what I do, but I really enjoy taking very long percolating times for things. Very long, brain soaks in given projects. And also there's a lot of research time. But especially with the various things that I have going and the things that I know are going to come out, I'm going to have 3 releases next year. So all of which are in various stage of editorial. I'll blink and then a couple of months will go by. You're like, wait, what did I do? Oh, well, you were doing developmental edits on this, and then other edits on this, and then other, exploratory conversations and 10 bajillion emails. And then suddenly you're just the business of writing does take so much time. Just the ducks in a row with all of that, let alone going on sort of a self-appointed book tour, things like that. I do a lot of events because I find that the type of thing that I do, people are more responsive when I'm talking about my work. I'm blessed with really beautiful book covers, but sometimes people need me to talk about what I'm doing for them to understand what I'm doing because of that cross-genre nature.
Tell me a little bit about this dual creativity that you have. And the reason that I want to explore it for just a little bit is one of my favorite books on writing is David Mamet's On Directing Film. And it localizes everything into the scene. And he takes a very show don't tell approach. But it really moved me and it motivated me and it taught me what's important in storytelling. And you brought up your performance, your histrionics, your acting, and now you're doing this show. And I think that juxtaposition between writing stories, prose, and acting, the line between a screenplay, a play, and a book is something that's really beneficial to storytellers, being able to shift gears in those modalities. And that way the little yellow or red light goes off if you're being violative to your own principle, methodology, and practice. To your point you made earlier that this is just too much or too little, because on stage everything is seen. There's no internal action, and that's a great perspective to have.
It's been really helpful also in the nonfiction versus the fiction. It's a different part of my brain, but the the nonfiction chapters, and Andrea and I trade off on chapters. There's a few things we will co-write, but we can spread more ground and cover more ground and get to more stories if we dive in deep separately. And then kind of editorially, thankfully, our editor will stitches things all together in a really nice way structurally. And the tour guide part of me and the nonfiction part of me is always in concert. It's always in dialogue with itself. But it's also like I'm almost a director when I'm doing the nonfiction. And then I am inserting in as much of myself. It's, I'm talking in first person about why am I personally drawn to this particular story, because I do think in nonfiction, especially in narrative nonfiction, you have to have a point of view about it. So we're just very honest about our own personal point of view in this. The America's Most Gothic is even more personal than the first book. And that being able, though, to shift, knowing that now I've told you why it's important to me. And here's the players on the stage, then setting the scene of, now here's actually the ghost story, and here's what I find most fascinating, or, and throwing in a few choice, spectacular details that have been, associated with a historic property or a person through time. The knowing when to kind of use what tool, but trying not to overthink it either too. Like a lot of what I'm doing and shifting gears between one project to the next, a lot of it's just like instinct at this point. And all of it's stuff that I care about. So it's like a lot of times I'm just like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm leading in my heart. And structurally I'll make sure I can futz with it later. But the fiction side of me, I get to really go into the drink. I really get to go underwater in fiction. And then, but I use kind of a nonfiction brain when I'm looking at it, especially if I'm implementing editorial notes. That's when I can kind of, when to be in the headspace of the character, or the atmosphere of what you're trying to evoke. In nonfiction, you still have to set the scene. You still have to make the reader feel like they're there in whatever place you're trying to describe. Especially since we're talking about very specific locations with very specific looks to them. So there's quite a switchboard up here. And most of the buttons are labeled. Most of it looks like, my brain looks like a theater. It has like a control board. There's like a fly rail, there's and things are going up and coming down, and
backstage,
it's
all the lights.
It's backstage. Yeah, it's all the brain's a stage.
And that juxtaposition is useful. It's a shift in perspective. And this goes back to your genre busting approach too, where you're changing gears and you're also changing modalities and approaches between stage, screen, prose, and it's self-reinforcing and self-disciplining. So one calls bullshit on the other.
It does absolutely. Yeah. When one of my characters is getting way too dramatic for their own good, my other characters will call them out on it. Especially Strange and Beautiful is a great case in point, because I have a group of Ghostbusters who are led by a very bombastic, brooding Gothic hero, and who the heroine finds absolutely magnificent, and he is, but his colleagues will make sure that if he gets too much, if it's just too overbearing, they will make sure that they cut him down to size. And I think that just makes for a fun dynamic. And that way I am aware that everyone's going to have their limit with any one of these characters. Because it's just, we're not always on stage 24/7, every moment of the day. So, and I want to make sure that the reader can take a breath as well and not feel like they have to be.
You're very generous. I think if I err on the side of anything that's not giving the reader too much of a break, which is pedal to the metal. I also have an anti-hero who's this reprehensible exhibitionist, narcissist, drug addicted Gen Z hustler. And and I think he's lovable in his own way, but I let him have it. I wrote and rewrote my 3 lines to be as unflattering to my character as possible. And I just had a blast in insulting my own protagonist. And I think that acts as a kind of refreshing counterpoint where he's involved in all of these despicable exploits. And I'm reminding the reader that, yeah, he really is that bad. I think that veneer of descriptive miasma could be entertaining in its own way. So I think experimentation is good, and I think pushing the envelope is good. But to your point, it's a delicate equilibrium that takes us full circle to these boundaries between the living and the dead, between stage and prose, between one genre and another, and between living the life of a writer and a business person. It's the dance.
Yeah, I'm a very liminal being, and I have to kind of stand on a threshold every day and sort of see what room or corridor I'm walking into. And then going back to that my state at rest is at that threshold. Um and it and sometimes where I move is dictated by a sense of getting a push from the spirit world, like I talked about, that early feeling of calling, of sense of I need to do this, not just for myself but other voices that are driving me, and other energies that also want to be seen and heard through what I'm doing. So much of our nonfiction is about making sure that voices are heard and seen and represented as best we know how, especially kind of returning to some hidden history aspects too. Um, but but then sometimes too it is, well, where do I want to be going? The idea of like, yeah, write what you know. Well, also write what you want to know. Yes, write what you know, because that's unique to you, and everyone does. In order to have that authentic voice, that is unique to you. So, what is unique to you? Asking yourself that of writing what you know, but then of course writing what you want to know, because that's where the research comes in. That's what are the hyperfixations that you have that you want to make interesting for the reader. And I love when that's when something I didn't know I wanted to know about, becomes a whole new thing that I'm thrilled I learned about because of reading a book about it. So I think that a lot of my interest in the dovetailing of science and art is really beautifully exemplified in my favorite play. We recently lost my favorite playwright, Tom Stoppard, and his play Arcadia is a beautiful dual timeline narrative, contemporary and historic. And there's these beautiful monologues about heat exchange and about a young woman who's actually charting a path of thermodynamics, but she's in the 17th century, and she does not quite she doesn't have enough math, she doesn't have a computer yet to chart that actual trajectory, and a modern mathematician is realizing that she was on to what we now know as modern math and modern physics, and so I love that idea that we're all kind of parts of these um, intersecting dialogues, and that for me, that kind of nonlinear nature of the past is present, and the past is prologue, and the present is also prologue, is it's a lovely place to be, as chaotic as it can feel sometimes, but that the space where I'm not sure exactly what's next, and I have a lot of projects, but I'm going to kind of see which one I work on each day is dependent on any of these other various factors. There's a little bit of excitement in that perilous precipice of stepping out from liminal space and not sure where your foot's going to land. But I like what I have set up as the structure, and so I hope that that reads in my work as well. I enjoy putting readers on a perilous footing, but I promise I'll reinforce it as we go.
I believe in that paranormal world where creativity and intuition lie. And I don't think all the entities and essences on the other side are necessarily benign, as we were talking about earlier. The idea of Loki, the mythological construct of the Joker, the Fool.
Yeah, there's a lot of chaos out there too. Absolutely.
Life is such a circus and it's so unfair, and our own lives seem absurd so much of the time that I feel I'm being toyed with a little bit, and I embrace it because it makes my life more interesting and fun, even and especially when things go wrong. It's that titillating prick of fate and uncertainty, frustration that motivate me to get outside my own comfort zone and fight back a little bit. I'm like, you know what? No.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that defiance is really the energy I think writers, creative people feast off of.
Absolutely. There's so much chaos out there that we cannot control, and I'm not interested in necessarily controlling things. But I have to ride the waves of everything that gets disrupted, and try to do it with a sense of kindness, and try to do it with a sense of figuring out where my own center of gravity is when we're feeling tossed off of our own, off balance. One of the things that one of my favorite theater directors, Anne Bogart, said when she ran the City Company, the Saratoga International Theater Institute, and I was part of one of her intensives once, and she said something that stayed with me always. And it is, the most interesting thing to watch on stage is when a character is physically thrown off balance and trying to get back into regaining their balance again. And I thought, that's kind of an interesting thing about life too. So I feel like that's just what I do as an actor when I'm trying to portray that a character is moving through their space, trying to get to their goal. What's my motivation? Trying to get back to balance again. And I feel like that's pretty much the crux of a lot of the trajectory of my books too. Because I do think that struggle towards regaining balance is something that we crave as species and as a society. And so the fight to get back to that is, I do believe, like a captivating thing that goes back to like into the deepest part of us. So that's, again, that came from a theater workshop, and it influences, and that was a theater workshop when I was a teenager, and it goes into every single thing that I do and every choice that I make, and that initial step from whatever's the next project. It's like that, just that step in and of itself is, that's off balance. Well, let's try to gain balance where we go.
I was a theater critic for about a year in Chicago, which is great to be a theater critic.
Oh
Off
yeah.
Broadway, off
Oh
Broadway,
yeah.
Broadway.
That's a scene.
That's the scene. It was mid 90s
Oh,
too, which
nice.
was another scene. Over the course of about a year, I think I saw probably 150 plays and I reviewed about 100 of them,
Amazing.
2 a week on average. So I'm
Amazing.
seeing this semi experimental play. It's about Foucault and justice, and it had all that kind of preachiness that younger people put into an earnest ideologue driven expose. So it wasn't great, but I got a little tipsy in the press booth before the show, and they had these folding chairs set up in like a gym, and and they had a stage propped up, and I was right in the front row with the press. So I had my little notepad, sort of kind of pre-digital days, and I'm drunk because I knew what I was getting myself into. And about a quarter of the way through the play, the folding chair, I'm a big guy. I'm like 6'2", 220. It gave out, and I slipped, and I literally tumbled onto the stage mid-scene.
Oh my God.
And I'll never forget, like, looking up at the actress playing the lead, and without missing a beat, she was so incredible. She's doing her lines, and then she goes, sotto voice, "Are you all right?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I roll back
That's so funny.
to the thing, and the show went on. So I incorporated that into my critique of the show. And the reason I bring all this up is the destruction of the proscenium arch is what you're talking about here, which is breaking boundaries, getting out of your comfort zone, mixing and matching. And this goes back to what we've been talking about too, the dichotomy between the living and the dead, between matter and energy, between fiction and nonfiction. Keep all of that in play, and you can't go wrong, because that makes every new book, every new experience fresh. That's what I've loved most about our conversation, which is I feel you do that each and every day, where you're not constrained. You're always fighting and being a little mischievous with genre and storytelling.
And holding things that could seem antithetical but are actually just in conversation, which I think is what that creates an energy in and of itself. And that is energy that is kind of my my nucleus. Like it's really kind of my engine, is these things that seem like they could be antithetical, but no, they're just particles moving really fast. And we're just seeing what comes of it. And trying not to be destructive along the way for ourselves or others. But holding complications and sort of seeing, okay, well, but where can we be each from our own perspective, trying to work towards something over there that seems that hopefully peaceful and with some resolution to what would seem like a conflict. So there's a certain amount of de-escalation that I'm interested in working with in my work, but also not just by pretending things didn't happen. De-escalation by resolution and by a certain sense of justice, whatever that may mean. And that depends from one series to the next, from one book to the next. And there's a lot of stuff within our nonfiction where we can't offer that. And that's been one of the harder things, is that in the nonfiction, a lot of these things are not resolved. But talking about them helps us feel like, well, then let's just think about them, because most things will not necessarily be resolved. So, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be called to sit with that discomfort. That's sort of
history's often bunk.
Yeah.
And if you're true to it, then you just need to tell it like it is, and then maybe highlight and prioritize some of the hopeful elements that have led to society learning a few things. One step forward, now we're a couple steps back.
But we can't let the doom and gloom of it have its hold. We can't as a society exist in that kind of entropy of misery. It's just not, nothing can live in that environment.
And on that hopeful note, I want to thank you sincerely for making time.
And you.
For being on the Science Fiction Fantasy Factory.
I am so grateful for you engaging so deeply with the themes and what I do. I feel seen and heard, and I'm very grateful. And just thank you for your time and for being cross genre with me. I love that.
Yes, let's keep crossing it up. And then when is your next book out?
So I'll have a bunch of stuff out next year. Ravenfield Hall is going to be out in February
That's the
of
YA book.
That's the Gothic YA that I was talking about. I have another gaslamp fantasy called Dead Ringer, about a telephone operator who has a ghost come through her console in 1892 Manhattan, and she has to solve the ghost murder by listening in on a telephone line. And so it's an amateur sleuth mystery, and it's very fun. Full of again, a big cast of characters, very whimsical, very fun, and very a love letter to New York City and to a diverse group of people, also saving the day. So I'm not sure when Dead Ringer is coming out, to tell you the truth, because that also got bumped in. The City Owl Press is the publisher on that. Ravenfield Hall will be out with Hachette. Union Square and Company is the imprint. And then I'll have the paperback release of America's Most Gothic. So this is hardcover. And so there'll be a paperback release at some point, probably next fall. And in the meantime, this year, I'm going to have some anthologies out with some short stories. And I'll be working on a one-woman show, and I will share as much of that publicly on my various social media channels as I'm able to. I'll probably have some New York performances of that, as well as some Massachusetts performances of that. So, but that is all still very much still in the works, because I gotta finish the script.
Links in the description below, folks, to get Leanne's books, to follow her along, and to keep on track with all your prolific output. Very impressive, very inspirational, and super fun talking to you.
Thank you. You as well. This has been a joy.
And I would love to have you back when these 2-3 books come out.
Let's do it. Let's talk about ghost ships when Ravenhill Hall comes out.
I'm in it to win it.
Amazing.
As I think Richard Pryor said when he was mimicking one of his relatives, I believe. I believe.
True. We are believers. We just, when stuff happens. Stuff happens. Thank you. I appreciate you.
You rock.
Thank you. And you.